Okay, our next lesson is going to be a quick lesson on ratios. Now, ratio is probably a word that you have heard before. People use it often when they're just speaking about comparing two things. They might say the ratio of boys to girls or the ratio of students to teachers. But it begs the question, what really is a ratio? It's probably a word that you've heard or maybe even used, but what is it? What is a ratio? So we're going to define this first before we move on. So I would get this down in your notes that a ratio is simply a comparison between two amounts. It's a comparison between two amounts, and it typically involves how much of one amount is in another. So that's a ratio. All we're doing is comparing two amounts. What are some examples of ratios that you've heard? We already mentioned a few, and you can just list them here. Maybe it's student to teacher. Maybe that's the ratio. Maybe it's boys to girls in a class. Maybe it's how many inches are in a foot. That would be a type of ratio. Just to compare any comparison of two amounts, that all counts as ratios. So when we simplify a ratio, all we need to do is we need to take each part of the ratio, we have two parts here, and convert it to like units and then reduce the fraction. So here's what I mean. Here we have 12 centimeters on top, 4 meters on bottom. I either need to convert both to meters or both to centimeters. Now, there are 100 centimeters in 1 meter. So if I have 4 meters, that would be the same as 400 centimeters. And now I need to reduce this fraction. So you can plug this into your calculator, or you can just divide by 2. I would get 6 over 200, divide by 2 again, I would get 3 over 100 until you get 3 over 100. So our ratio here would simplify to 3 over 100. What about 6 feet to 18 inches? Once again, I need to convert both of these to like units so that their units are the same, and then reduce the fraction. So I'm going to convert feet to inches. How many inches are in 6 feet? Well, if 12 inches are in 1 foot, then 12 times 6 will give me the number of inches in 6 feet. So 12 times 6 is 72 inches over 18 inches. And 18 goes into 72 4 times. So this ratio simplifies to 4 over 1. Now, if this was a fraction, we would just write it as 4, right? But when it's a ratio that we're talking about, we actually want to leave it like this. And another way to write this ratio would be like this, 4:1. Both of these mean the same thing, and they mean that there is a 4-to-1 ratio from this amount to this amount. That this is 4, and this is equivalent to 1. So that's how we simplify ratios. Pretty simple stuff. We're going to do an example problem. This is actually a pretty complicated example problem. The perimeter of rectangle ABCD is 60 centimeters. The ratio of AB to BC is 3:2. Find the length and the width of the rectangle. Well, let's try and draw this rectangle as best we can. Now, we know that the perimeter, which if I was finding the perimeter, I'd have to add up all of the sides. So if this is the width and this is the length, then the perimeter would be the width plus the width plus the length plus the length, or 2W plus 2L. And we already know that that equals 60, right? So we don't know what the width is, but we know that the ratio of the width to the length is this ratio of 3 to 2. If this rectangle was A, B, C, D like this, then AB to BC would be 3 to 2. So obviously the width and the length aren't 3 and 2, but it's going to be 3 times some number and 2 times some number. So now that we have these values that represent our width and our length, we can plug them in to this equation and then solve. So I'd plug in 3x for W, and I'd plug in 2x for L. I'd still set that equal to 60, and now I can solve. 2 times 3x is 6x, 2 times 2x is 4x, and that equals 60, so 10x equals 60, and x is 60 divided by 10, which is 6. Now that's not my answer because it asked me to find the length and the width of the rectangle. So I need to turn around and plug x back in. So the width is going to be 3 times x, and since x is 6, 3 times 6, so the width is going to be 18, and the length is going to be 12. Now, here's what's important to this. 18 and 12 have a ratio of 3 to 2. If I were to put them in a ratio and simplify them, that would be a ratio of 3 to 2. And when I plug them into the formula, they add to 60, so it meets both of our requirements. Now, one of the things that we do most of the time with proportions or with ratios is we put them into a proportion. So what is a proportion? Well, a proportion is essentially just setting two ratios equal to each other. Okay, so I need to have two ratios and I need to set them equal to each other. And to solve a proportion, so here we have a ratio of 4 over x and here we have a ratio of 5 over 7. To solve this proportion, all we need to do is to cross multiply. So here's what I mean by cross multiply. We have this proportion here, one ratio set to the other, and we need to find out what value of x will make 4 over x equal 5 over 7. So I'm going to take these values, I'm actually going to cross multiply them. I'm going to draw these little arrows here and help remind me that I'm going to multiply x times 5, which would be 5x, and 4 times 7. 4 times 7 is 28. So this equal sign stays here and I just cross multiply. So when I solve, I need to divide both sides by 5, and 28 divided by 5 is just 28/5. So the equal sign stays there, and on one side I'm going to have this cross multiplication, which would be 2 times y plus 2. And on this side I'm going to have 3 times y. And now I need to just distribute and solve. 2y plus 4 and 3y. So I need to collect like terms. So to collect like terms, I need to get all the y's to the same side. So I'm going to subtract 2y from this side, subtract 2y from this side, and I'm left with y equals 4. Now, what I want you to do is I want you to try this one on your own, and I'm going to tell you right now you're going to have to factor and then solve in order to do it. Okay, thank you for watching this video. I hope you took good notes. Make sure that you have good notes. If you need to go back and rewatch any part of this video, feel free. Please go back and rewatch to make sure you understand something, and then when you're done, you can do the practice problems that I have put on PowerSchool.